Okay, let's unpack this. When you think about Africa, this huge, diverse continent, what comes to mind first? Is it like the origins of humanity or maybe more recent history, colonialism? Today, we're doing a deep dive into Africa's really rich, complex history. We'll trace the journey from, well, the very beginnings right up to today.
Yeah, and we're setting the stage for you using a pretty fascinating stack of sources. We've got historical maps, some you rarely see, detailed research, plus our own notes pulling it all together. Our mission really is to cut through all the noise, the overload of information, and give you a clear, engaging, and genuinely well-informed picture of this continent's incredible story. We want to hit those key nuggets of knowledge.
Absolutely. Get ready for some real aha moments because we found some genuinely surprising facts that might just shift how you think about it all. So let's start our deep dive right at the beginning. Africa as the cradle of humanity. It's where our species got its start, which makes its ancient history just fundamental to, well, everyone's story.
Right. And what's striking is, while everyone accepts it as the birthplace, the actual origin of the name Africa is, well, it's more complex than people usually think. The most common theory links it to the Latin word Afri that referred to people living near Carthage, basically modern-day Tunisia. And Afri itself might connect to even older words like the Phoenician afar, meaning dust, or maybe the Berber word Ifri, which could mean cave or like a protected place.
Okay, now here's something that really challenges what a lot of people believe about the name. You've probably heard Africa was named after the Roman general Scipio Africanus. Well, our sources show that's just not right. Scipio actually got his name, Africanus, which means conqueror of Africa, after he beat Carthage. So he got his name from the continent, not the other way around.
Exactly. And it's a similar story with Leo Africanus, who was born Al-Hassan ibn Muhammad. He didn't name the continent either. He got his adopted name much later when Pope Leo X gave it to him. Why? Because his travels and deep knowledge of North Africa, it shows how people get linked to places, but aren't the source of the name itself.
Wow, that's quite a clarification on Scipio and Leo. Really turns common ideas upside down. So, if those are wrong, what do your sources say is the original indigenous name?
Our research points strongly towards Alkebulan. That's the name we find as the continent's original one, rooted in indigenous knowledge, appearing in different historical records and oral traditions. It's not just another name, it seems to be the oldest one, and crucially, the only word of indigenous origin we can find that refers to the whole continent. And that fact alone, it makes you question how places get their names and how often indigenous perspectives get pushed aside.
Okay, so stepping back into that pre-colonial era, it was incredibly vibrant. We're talking powerful, sophisticated kingdoms and empires. Think about states like the Zulu Empire or regions like Tanganyika and Zanzibar, thriving, connected with their own rich histories long before, major European contact.
Exactly. And the key thing often missed is they weren't isolated. Not at all. These societies were deeply linked. Our sources show massive evidence of trade, cultural exchange, all happening between Africans themselves. And this goes back millennia, not just centuries. You've got networks forming as early as, say, 7,000 BCE, people moving things like obsidian, red ochre across huge distances, Sahara and Nile Valley. By 3000 BCE, you see ancient Egypt trading actively with Nubia and Punt down in East Africa. Then, maybe around 500 CE, you get these huge empires, Ghana, Mali, Songhai. They turn places like Timbuktu and Gao into massive trade hubs, building on Saharan roots that were already ancient. Even the Bantu migrations, over a long period like 1000 BCE to 1500 CE, they spurred on internal trade too, cattle, iron, crops across Central, East, and Southern Africa. This trade wasn't just secondary, it was like the lifeblood.
So this huge internal trade, what does it really tell us about Africa before colonialism? It completely counters that old idea of just isolated tribes, right? It shows a continent connected by complex economies way before outsiders arrived, real internal dynamism, and the goods being traded. Super diverse. Gold and salt, yeah, those were huge, especially in West Africa from places like Bambouk to Gaza. But also cola nuts, culturally vital ivory, cattle, really fine cloth.
Right.
To paint a picture, West Africa's gold from Bambouk Bureau that fueled the trans-Saharan routes, often traded for salt from desert mines. But that same network moved ostrich feathers, leather, gum arabic, horses too, further south, forest and savanna areas, palm oil, yams, rubber, spices, plus crafts like amazing pottery, bronze work. And the East African coast, the Swahili cities, they were plugged into the Indian Ocean trade, exporting gold from places like Zimbabwe, Monomotapa inland, plus iron, copper, connecting Africa to Asia. It was a whole complex ecosystem. Okay, let's shift now to early external contacts, and it's crucial to get this. Significant European presence came after a long history of other outside interactions. I mean, you have Phoenician mariners possibly sailing around Africa way back like 600 BCE, Hanno the Navigator exploring West Africa around 500 BCE, setting up trade. Then later, maybe 100 to 400 CE, Roman explorers and definitely Indian and Arab traders very active on the East African coast, part of the Indian Ocean network. And even much later, people like Ibn Battuta in the 14th century documenting Islamic societies, or China's Zheng He with his huge fleets visiting East Africa in the early 15th century for diplomacy.
Right. So when European explorers arrived, especially the Portuguese in the late 1400s, it's a new phase, but not the first contact by any means. You have figures like Don Diego de Zambuja building Elmina Castle in 1482, initially for gold. Bartolomeu Diaz rounding the Cape of Good Hope in 1488, a huge navigational feat. And Vasco da Gama finding the sea route to India via East Africa soon after. What's interesting about this early European contact is, yes, they wanted valuable stuff, gold, metals, spices, but there was often an element of maybe curiosity, negotiation. The trade was often somewhat balanced initially.
But this period also sees the rise of that famous phrase, God, gold, and glory, the big motives for European engagement. And it's so important to see how tangled up they were. God, that's the religious angle, spreading Christianity, missionaries, sometimes used as a moral cover, for civilizing people. Like the Portuguese converting King Afonso in Congo early on. Gold, well, that's not just literal gold, it's all wealth. Ivory, spices, timber, palm oil. And then, tragically, enslaved people became a huge part of this economic drive. Trade forts like Elmina were built to lock down these profits. And glory, that's the politics, imperial competition. Nations racing each other to claim land, control coastlines. It was about power, national pride, naval strength.
And the way trade worked early on, it was mostly coastal. Often quite diplomatic, actually. African leaders frequently controlled access, deciding where and how a trade happened. But here's the critical question that arises from our sources. How did that system, that controlled trade, change so fundamentally when the transatlantic slave trade really took off, starting in the early 1500s?
Yeah.
That shift just completely altered the dynamic, from something closer to exchange, even if unequal, to horrific extraction and suffering. It set a devastating course. Hashtag 4-day.
Now, understanding how the transatlantic slave trade even started, it means looking at its justification, which is, frankly, shocking. Our sources point directly to papal bulls' official decrees from the Pope, specifically Dum Diversas in 1452 and Romanus Pontifex in 1455. These were issued by Pope Nicholas V, and they basically granted Christians, and I quote, the divine right to conquer non-Christian lands and enslave the people they encountered. It provided this chilling religious backing for what became a horrific enterprise.
Yeah, and that supposed divine right tragically fueled the business of the slave trade on a massive scale. Portugal, Britain, France, they became the biggest players, the most sustained participants, driven purely by the enormous profits from supplying forced labor, mostly to plantations in the Americas. You had powerful chartered companies set up specifically for this Britain's Royal African Company, France's Compagnie des Indes. They systematized this brutal trade. Portugal ran the largest operation overall, mainly through Brazil. Britain became the biggest transporter of enslaved people in the 1700s. Ports like Liverpool, Bristol, they boomed because of it. But others were involved too, the Netherlands, Denmark, who were actually among the first to abolish their trade later, Spain, Sweden, even smaller states like Brandenburg, Prussia. It was widespread European involvement.
But amidst this horror, it's so vital we talk about African resistance. It's a story of incredible agency and defiance against overwhelming odds. We see powerful figures like Queen Nzinga of Ndongo and Matamba, that's modern Angola, fighting the Portuguese for decades in the 1600s, King Agaja of Dahomey in Benin, challenging European slavers, King Jaja of Opobo in Nigeria, resisting British control later on. And even into the early 20th century, you have inspiring figures like Ya Asante Wa of Edwisu in Ghana, leading the Asante resistance against the British. Their stories are crucial.
So while Europeans have been present for centuries, trade forts, missionaries, the actual official start of direct colonization, taking over territory, really kicks off late in the 19th century. The Berlin Conference, 1884 to 85, that's the key diplomatic event. It's where European powers literally sat down and carved up the continent among themselves. Drew lines on maps, no Africans present, of course, and those existing European forts. Their purposes shifted. Elmina, built for gold, became infamous for the slave trade. Fort Jesus in Kenya, built to control Indian Ocean trade, including slaves. Castle of Good Hope in South Africa, a Dutch military base. They cemented control.
Right, and this colonial grip, It lasted for decades. But things really started to shift after the World Wars, especially World War II. That massively ramped up the demand for independence across Africa. For one thing, the colonial powers themselves were weakened financially, politically by the wars. Plus, Africans had contributed hugely to the war efforts as soldiers, porters, in logistics, fighting in East Africa, Europe, North Africa, Asia. Huge sacrifices. So what does this all mean? Well, Africans expected something in return, rightly demanded recognition and freedom for their service. You also had rising political awareness. The wars exposed the contradictions of colonial rule. Powerful nationalist leaders emerged. And then there were riots, protests, growing international pressure, plus the whole global decolonization trend like dominoes falling.
Absolutely. And this period produced truly incredible leaders who drove these independence movements. You think of Kwame Nkrumah in Ghana, Jomo Kenyatta in Kenya, Julius Nyerere in Tanzania, Patrice Lumumba in the DRC, Nelson Mandela in South Africa, just to name a few giants. And it raises a really important question looking back. What was their vision? What did these leaders hope to build in their newly free nations beyond just ending colonial rule? How would they navigate that future?
So as Africa enters this post-independence era, the path forward, well, it wasn't straightforward. The continent obviously kept its incredible diversity, languages, religions, cultures built over millennia. But the new nations faced really complex challenges, many inherited directly from colonialism.
Indeed. For many, that sudden shift to self-rule, often within those artificial borders drawn in Berlin, it unfortunately led to instability. Political turmoil, sometimes civil conflict, economic difficulties. You had issues like the resource curse in some places, where mineral wealth ironically seemed to hinder broader development, or the Cold War playing out with external powers interfering. Big hurdles. But at the same time, you saw incredible resilience and innovation too. Organizations like the African Union emerged, aiming for greater unity, peace, tackling continent-wide problems. Collaborative efforts started taking shape.
Yeah, and what's really exciting today is seeing the dynamism across the continent. Huge growth in tech, for example. Vibrant hubs in Lagos, Nairobi, driving digital change. Real leadership in renewable energy, too. And a booming creative sector, think Nollywood. Contemporary art making waves globally.
Africa's story is absolutely ongoing. Its deep history keeps shaping its present and future. It proves it's a constantly evolving, dynamic continent, often challenging those old external narratives about it. #HaveAtra.
Wow. What an incredible sweep through history we've taken today. From Africa's original names, those ancient, complex trade networks, through external contact, the horrors of the slave trade, colonization, and that long, hard fight for independence.
Yeah, it's a lot to cover. What really stands out to you from this deep dive? We've only managed to scratch the surface, really, of this immense story. But if you connect it all, the bigger picture, it just highlights the incredible resilience, the deep indigenous innovation, and the sheer complexity layered throughout Africa's history.
Definitely. And maybe here's a final thought for you, our listener, to mull over. Considering Africa's long, long history of internal innovation, its global connections even before colonialism, and its proven resilience against huge challenges, how might this deep, diverse heritage uniquely position the continent to lead in tackling future global challenges, things like climate change or the next wave of tech innovation?
It's a powerful question. We really hope you continue exploring this fascinating history and always question the common narratives. There's always so much more to learn from Africa's past and its vibrant present.